What For Against Darkness supplements to get. There are a lot of videos out there looking at what For Against Darkness books to get. And, frankly, I get it. As of filming right now, there are over 50 books. I think there are 3 lanterns, 10 adventure decks, 11 adventure zines, 5 monster decks, 5 mapping decks, an oracle decks, and that's not to speak of the Patreon with weekly content, 4 spin-off books, all the fan-made content, and then all of the content that has been written but not released yet. As a result, there is a vast majority of content for Against Darkness that you need to break down into. As a beginner, but also as an advanced player, that's actually quite hard to do. Now, those videos that I mentioned previously all have one significant problem, and that's they all take their own spin on the game. The thing about For Against Darkness is actually it applies to lots of different people, and there are lots of different styles of game that you can play. As a result, in this video, I'm going to break down specific things about what you might like specifically in For Against Darkness and offer books for those. So I'm going to start by breaking down the different categories. So we have the core books, or what I'm going to class as the beginner books. These are essentially all the books that you might get as a beginner without knowing what you like For Against Darkness. Assuming that you are literally just coming into For Against Darkness blind, these are the 4 books that I would suggest. You then have the advanced books. Now, these are the ones that you would probably get second if you wanted to continue the story of where you are and you still weren't sure. However, of all the other categories that I'm going to go through, I probably would suggest getting these advanced books anyway. We then have the different categories. So the first one is the one-shotter. These are the types of people that like to play in, for example, a lunch break. They want one particular dungeon crawl, and at the end of the dungeon crawl, they throw away their characters and then move along. There is a real benefit to doing this because you don't have to carry along any of your characters or any of your stories, and it does open a lot of specific books for you. But in addition to that, it means there are a very different way of going about purchasing the books. We then have the mapper. So one of the big things about For Against Darkness is that you can physically put together all of your maps by using the random tables and tiles. This is a really big thing for a lot of people, and there are both people that really enjoy designing the maps themselves for dungeons, but also some overland stuff as well. And in here, I will mention overland stuff specifically for you. There are some options available, but I will actually have a separate video coming on that later. We then have the campaigner or the RPGer. This is the type of person that likes to carry a specific set of characters over a long period of time to make a campaign. If you've seen any of my previous videos, that's the type of person that I am. I like to write a big book full of all these different things. There is some limitations that you have here. For Against Darkness hasn't really been made as a campaign play, but as time goes on, there have been more and more books that allow for this, and there are more things that you can do and specifically purchase in order to make that happen. And then we have the traveller. This is the type of person that literally likes to play on the go. They want the smallest possible selection of tools that they can get, yet they want as much variation as possible. Realistically, with a pen and paper and 2 dice, that's pretty much all you need for Against Darkness, but actually you can narrow that down even smaller so you don't have to have any pens and paper or any dice. So we will get onto that quickly. And then finally, we're going to go into more things that you may want from the game. So this could be more classes, more variation. Maybe you want to go into cities or hexes, or maybe you just really hate drawing and as a result you want some options for you as well. Quick notes, we're not going to include any spin-offs in this list, and we're also not going to include any 18 plus content. Obviously, these are fantasy books, and so you may want to have some 18 plus content, and there is some limitations exactly on what 18 plus content might be, so just be aware. We start off with the beginner. Now this is obviously the very first book, the For Against Darkness book that you're going to need. It is the basis for everything that this list contains. You will need that book. But there are 3 books that I would suggest getting in top of that. The first one is For Against the Abyss. So in this book, you will allow your characters to raise from level 5 to level 9. The reason that I suggest this is depending on the way that you like to play, you may get up to level 5 or even beyond in a small campaign or a one-shotter, which we'll get onto later on. And as a result, you probably do want the 4 Against Abyss book fairly quickly. In addition to that, most of the additional supplements actually use elements from the 4 Against Abyss game, and as a result, I would suggest getting that. The other two things I would suggest, first of all, are Caves of the Kobold Slave Masters. This was essentially the first big supplement for Against Darkness and sets up a very simple campaign play that runs over, I think it's 3 different adventures. Is actually a blast to play. It adds a lot of variation, a lot of movements to the game itself, and is definitely something I would suggest. In addition to that, I would actually suggest getting 1 or even possibly 2 of the lanterns. Now, there are 3 lanterns in total, lantern 1, 2, and 3. I wouldn't suggest lantern 3. There are some things in lantern 3 that are very good, but for a beginner, I will probably stick to lantern 1 and 2. What these are is a small zine that include lots of different things. So you may get new character classes, you may get new adventures, you may get new monsters or minions. As a result, these lanterns essentially have a bit of everything for you to play. Depending on what you find in Caves of the Kobold Slave Masters and Lantern 1, you can really understand what you might want from this game and go from there. The next category is the advanced. So essentially, once you've got those beginner books and you've started to play, you're looking for something else. The first thing that I would suggest you are the twisted books. The twisted books cover minions, dungeons, and hordes. There are others, and there are also zines. I wouldn't suggest the zines, I would just pick those 3, but these give you a lot of variation for your gameplay. So essentially, instead of having the standard minions, you can add some of the twisted minions in. Instead of it just being a standard dungeon, you can instead allow for the twisted dungeon that adds some unique factor upon your dungeon. I won't spoil any of those, however, I definitely think they add a lot of variation into the play. Then I would suggest Forsaken Depths. Now, this pushes characters from level 10 to level 19, so it's a real big jump. If you want to play some of the longer campaigns, this is a necessary book, but actually there are some elements in this book that I would probably suggest you play anyway, even if you're in the sort of 5 to 9 levels part of the game. And finally, I would suggest Treacheries of the Troublesome Towns. There's actually 2 supplements here. You will need both of those to play. It adds cities to your game. I will caveat that with 1 type of city to the game. And it does also add a lot of other features to play. However, in order to play Treacheries of the Troublesome Towns, you will definitely need 4 Against the Abyss, as we mentioned in the beginner category. It adds so much variation to the game. It is crazy. So I would really suggest those 2. They are the most loved supplements that you can possibly find in the game as of right now. So the first of the categories that we're going to look at is the one-shooter. This is the person that really loves to play through either a single book or a single game, and that's essentially it. They don't want anything long to play through. They don't really care for the characters that much. They really are just running through a game as quickly as possible. There are lots of different books that work for this. Things like Echoes of the Dead, Dark Waters, Caverns of Chaos, Buried Secret, Heart of the Lizard, Court of the Pixie King. All of these have very simple or small campaigns to play. And by small, I mean less than 3 or up to 3, I should probably say, dungeon delves in order to get to the end of the book. They add a lot of story, and as a result, you can really feel the sort of the depth in that. If you do want something larger, look to the sort of campaigner and RPG side of things. There are definitely some more options for you. However, in addition to those supplements, which can be fairly expensive, what I would suggest is 3 other things. The first one is the adventure card decks. These are tarot card size decks that are 12 cards long, and they allow you to play the game essentially by flipping over the next card. Each single deck, though, is themed in some way. It has a either, or sometimes in these cases both, it has a design in regards to a theme. So, for example, there's a desert theme, but then also there's a complication. We previously mentioned in regards to Twisted Dungeons. It's a combination of Twisted Dungeons and a one-shooter in one card deck. Actually, one thing that's particularly interesting here is these also have new map tiles on them as well, and you can use them on the go because they have dice icons, which is really quite helpful if you're a bit of a traveler as well. Then I would suggest the posters. Now, there are a couple of posters. I would suggest Crypt of the Licht King and Lair of the Horned Beastman. These are posters that are essentially campaigns in themselves. The dungeon itself has already been written and designed. Essentially, you go through that map. As a result, you don't have to draw anything. And then finally, I would suggest one specific zine called Labyrinth of the Lurking Lepidopyri. This is a zine that essentially has one-shot adventure only. There are things in the Lantern, Lantern 1, 2 and 3, and then there will be in some of the further Lanterns that haven't yet released. And also there are a couple of zines that are coming out specifically for one-shots, so it's definitely a category to look out for. Then comes the mapper. Now, this is actually something that I really love. I love drawing the maps that come from this. As a result, any book that you're looking for, you're probably going to want new tiles. So if we start off, I'm going to suggest Court of the Pixie King, Delvers and Wanderers that have sewers, Digressions of the Devouring Dead that have necromantic 2 floored rooms, Lost Temples of Ka'a is a temples, and then you also, in addition to that, things like Crucible of Classic Critters that have forest tiles and Court of the Pixie King, that have meadows are really worth getting because they add a lot to the story. I think Crucible of Classic Critters is probably where I would start. It's pretty much the basic outdoors generator. It has lots of different variety in different environments. It has water, trees, forest fires as well. And also you can get additional dungeons that you have to go through in that book. So there's like a secondary level. In addition, More Mountainous Mayhem is essentially the follow-on from Crucible of Classic Critters. It's essentially the same game, but obviously it happens in a more mountainous area. And then finally, Treacheries of the Troublesome Towns as well, because they do contain new tiles specifically for city-based adventurers. And sewers, for that matter. And then I would suggest getting the adventure card decks because, as I said previously, they do have tiles on them. And then also the expanded level books. All of the expanded levels have their own tile sets to go with them. For example, the Forsaken Depths has tiles specific for the underworld or rivers, which is quite interesting. However, let's say you specifically want overland stuff. Now, we did mention previously Crucible of Classic Critters, which is forest, Court of the Pixie King, meadows, More Mountainous Mayhem, which is mountains. But there are a few others that I would also possibly suggest. The first one is Tales of the Adventurers Guild. Now, the reason for this, it isn't actually specifically a map-based book. It does add lots of additional information to the game, and it is a fantastic purchase. However, it allows for a basic hex plan design. Now, the game itself doesn't yet have a proper hex-based system. However, it will in future, and Tales of the Adventurers Guild lands the starting book for that to happen. Now, what's particularly interesting is Tales of the Adventurers Guild combined with Treacheries of the Troublesome Towns is a fantastic way to add cities to your book. So I think those are a good combination if you're looking for overland travel. There is one book, kind of two books, that have an additional outside hex level system. The first one is Maneater, which is based upon a forest. You don't have any personal variation in the hex plan. And then there's also a smaller Island of Secrets. This one is a bit of a combination of a book and a poster, which I find quite interesting. However, it is on one pure island, and so can be considered as a bit of a limited game. So I would probably just go with Crucible of Classic Critters, Court of the Pixie King, More Mountainous Mayhem, and Tales of the Adventurers Guild. But if you do want something that's more fleshed out, I would suggest Tantalizing Trails of the Turmoil and Treasure. Now, this isn't an official book. It's actually a fan-made supplement, but it is fantastic for outdoors travel in particular. It adds a lot of things in regards to what to do between adventurers and starts putting together a bit of a campaign play as well. Next up is the campaigner, the RPGer. So as we previously mentioned in regards to a few other instances, things like Samora Island of Secrets, Tales of the Adventurers Guild, and Treacheries of the Troublesome Towns add some type of campaign play. So I would start with those. But if you're looking for a campaign that is limited in its scope, Fortress of Warlord is quite good because it adds a let's say Lord of the Rings style game for you to play. It is quite long. It is considerably longer than any of the other games, so I would suggest that one. And then Echoes of the Dead as well, which is roughly about 5 different dungeons, which is worth playing. However, in addition to that, I would probably suggest you pick up a few other books. The first one is The Greedy Gifts for Guild Masters. That works well with Tales of the Adventurers Guild and essentially allows you to have a reason for a guild. There's someone already there that is looking to give you a job. And then Wayfarers and Adventurers, which adds a lot to the game, including new classes in particular. However, there are a few other bits and pieces that I think work really well for a campaign play. Obviously, if you're going for a campaign, you're going to need all the expanded level books. So you're going to need 4 Against the Abyss and 4 Against the Forsaken Depths. In addition to that, there are 2 other things that I would suggest you. The first one is the monster card decks. These are essentially just all of the minions that come from the base books anyway. However, it's much easier to play with the monster cards than it is to be flicking through books. Things like Twisted Minions will definitely help in regards to that, but I would suggest picking up those monster card decks in particular. And then finally, I would consider, and I would only say this as a consideration, the Oracle card deck. The reason being is that this deck was originally made specifically so you could pay campaign play. However, lots of people have reviewed it and been a bit iffy in regards to the way that it plays, and they prefer other things. Because of the system agnostic nature of War Against Darkness, you can add in a lot of other things and systems such as Mythic, which is one thing in particular that I like to add to the game, and I think it definitely will help you play a campaign. So you don't necessarily only have to get War Against Darkness content in order to have a bit of campaign play. Then we have the Traveller. So this is someone that likes to go out, they like to play in something like a lunchtime, they just want an easy and small system. Now, assuming that you know how to play the game because you have the base book, what I would suggest is the adventure card decks. This includes everything. The tile sets that you don't have to draw, you can literally just view them on the paper, on the cards, the dungeons, which are all variants, the themes, which are all variants, the minions, the enemies, the bosses, and even the special treasures, all of which are custom to these card decks. They are one-shot adventures, essentially. It is perfect for campaign play, for traveller play, and they also have dice icons at the top right-hand corner, meaning that you don't actually have to bring dice with you if you don't want to. In addition to that, I would possibly suggest the mapping card decks and the monster card decks. As I mentioned in our previous campaign play scenario, the monsters decks allows a level of freedom in regards to how you might play. Combining the adventure decks with the monster decks essentially pushes the adventure decks into a longer and longer viability in regards to play. It isn't just playing them once, you can play them multiple times over. And then I would also suggest the mapping decks, which are decks that come with map icons so you don't have to draw them and essentially allow you to combine the mapping and the monsters together to make the full game. And then we come to the final category, which is essentially looking for what you may want from the game. So the first thing is more classes or class customization. The first thing that I would suggest is the Wayfarers and Adventurers book. The reason being is that this adds in things called traits. They are essentially things that your characters might do, which could be positive or negative, or things that they could actively seek out as well. Then, second to this, I would get Twisted Traits, which allows you to have considerably more, and then Delvers and Wanderers, which allows you to have far more classes. This final book is purely only a class book. There are classes in Wayfarers and Adventurers, but Delvers and Wanderers is only classes. And then I would possibly suggest getting the Patreon. Now, the Patreon essentially pushes out new content and pre-release content, but one of the biggest things is new and more classes. They are definitely classes that sometimes are going to be hit and miss. Some of them will work, some of them won't. But if you're particularly interested in classes and class customization, the Patreon is definitely a way to go for you. Then more variation. What do you want? Just more of the same. Well, that's absolutely fine. Let's say you are specifically playing on a traveler situation or a one-shot situation, or maybe even a beginner situation. You feel that you're getting bored of what's already there. That's absolutely fine. I would suggest going for the Twisted series first. That's both books and zines. You have the traits, which apply more traits for your characters and class customization. Minions, which obviously give you more minions. Dungeons, which add a difference in regards to the game that you're playing. This dungeon might have an interesting twist. There's final fights, which essentially give you a new boss. It's not as simple as a new boss, however, I would suggest that. Twisted hordes, which gives you more treasures to collect. And then there's specific zines such as twisted doors, twisted axes, and twisted swords that are smaller in their size but just add more variation in regards to your play. You could start off with a particularly fancy axe, or you may pick up a particularly fancy axe whenever you need to pick up some treasure within your game. And then I would suggest Fiendish Foes, which essentially is like the Twisted Minions, but is a slightly harder set of minions. And then Audacious Adversaries, which is essentially exactly the same, but for their final fights, it's a more complicated final fight. It's going to be harder for you to play. And then I would go for something like Concise Collection of Classes to give you considerably more classes that you can play. And then Greedy Gifts of the Guildmasters, which adds this extra element that you may want to play on your game. I won't spoil it for you, but you have a guild master that is specifically asking you to do something specific, and it's normally quite an interesting thing to be playing. And then I will also suggest all of the card decks, to be honest, both the mapping, the adventure, and the monsters. It will give you lots of variation in the game. And then what happens if you just don't want to draw any of the maps? Now, there are two options for you here. The first one is the Dungeon Atlas. So the Dungeon Atlas literally has pre-made maps for you, so you don't have to think about drawing any maps. And then the second one to that is the card decks. Now, this could be both the adventure decks, which you don't have to draw any of the tiles that are physically on it, and then also the mapping decks, which, as you can tell, have already pre-printed maps on them. And then finally, let's say you love the game, but you really love cities. That's fine. We can deal with that, and we can deal with that in two different ways. The first one is Treacheries of the Troublesome Towns. This is the official way to add cities or towns into the book. You can also add smaller areas like hamlets. It is a complicated way of adding this city, but you get lots of personalization with the town. You get lots of feeling. You go through the town on a regular basis, and as you go through the town and do things, it changes and adapts to the story that you've come together. I really love it. But there's another option, which is Ravagers of Ruins. Now, this essentially is a book that allows you to go into a city as a dungeon. It is a ruined city, and that's probably the most important thing, but it isn't set out in the same way that you would play other games, so you don't draw tiles. Instead, it's a bit of a hex map that you can play. Hopefully, these give you some idea in regards to the scope of 4 Against Darkness and what you can do with the game, and then also gives you some suggestions in regards to what you might want to play next. If you do have any questions, drop them down in the comment section below. Hopefully you subscribe to my content to get some new 4 Against Darkness and solo RPG content in your inbox, and I'll speak to you soon. Happy gaming!